Got it.
All right. So, hey, everybody. This is the first episode of the Conspiracy of Hope channel's broadcast of Tread Talks, um, in which I realized that my friends and family are really interesting, and I'm going to interview all of them about something that gives them hope or brings them joy, because I think the world needs to know about what they do. And right now, today, I think probably each time I'll highlight a different organization that I love, but today I'm standing next to a banner of Tilt. I actually am not standing, I'm walking on my treadmill, thus Tread Talks. But I'm walking next to a banner of Tilt, the Institute for Love and Time, an organization that I co-founded with Wolfram Alderson in 2019. We are tilting the world towards hope, and you can find out more at loveandtime.org. And Polly has been involved deeply in Tilt and has been a friend of mine since college, the last year, her very last days of college at Oberlin. And so I want to introduce you to her, Polly Washburn. Introduce the world, although she has already been introduced to the world, to Polly Washburn, and I have no idea. So I'm running my treadmill just below a run. So sometimes I get out of breath. And this is just to encourage people to move bodies as we talk to people and think about things. That's right. So, Polly, how do you want to introduce yourself? And I don't know what your topic is, so tell me your topic.
Oh, I think I'll be introducing myself as I talk about my topic. But yes, love Tilt, love collaborating with you, love being friends with you. So yes, my work experience has been wide, and actually that is how I figured out what I was going to talk to you about.
Yes.
So rather than give away the punchline, I'm gonna just describe my life as I go.
Excellent. All right. So what gives you joy? How do you get hope? How do you give hope?
Well, first, I wanted to say that when you wrote me about this, you said we're going to talk about your passion. And so for me, that was like the first question is like, well, what does passion even mean, right? Is it the thing that we care the most about? Is it the thing we want to tell the world about and won't shut up about? And then I did come to what gives us joy and meaning, right? Because it's like, yes, I could talk about women in STEM. I could talk about embracing change. I could talk about it's never too late to try something new. Like these are all things I am passionate about and work on in the world. But in the end, I decided to think about what does give me joy, what has been kind of a through line, to use a screenwriting metaphor. What has been a through line in my life of something that has consistently given me joy. And I decided it was words, that is my unifying passion. And I've loved reading since I was a kid, you know, that notion of escaping to another place. See, yeah, you've got me in motion here. Actually, it's funny. It's like I'm at a stand-up desk and I find myself like, okay. Anyway, yeah, so that notion of like just kind of escape that words can give you, and great fiction can give you. And you know, I remember writing, I loved newspapers. Like I created my own newspaper when I was like 8 or 9 or something. And I wrote short stories. Like I was really into writing. And
Did you do investigative reporting for that newspaper, or was it all like, I'm just curious, was
no,
it like
no,
fabricated
like
or was
the
it
dog and my sister and whatever. Like, no.
awesome?
Although then the creative writing, yeah, did go into other realms of investigation. Yeah, and then in college, I didn't really take any creative writing. I wasn't brave enough. Like I just I did it my last year. I took a translation workshop because I love languages, right? So that's part of my word love, is like I took Latin, Greek, and French before even leaving high school. And then at Oberlin, I did ancient Greek and Russian. And so I knew I loved languages and translating. So doing a translation workshop felt like, well, it's someone else's words. I'm just going to translate them and make them nice. Like it was like a way of kind of like sneaking in creativity without being asked to like,
Did you
you
make
know,
them better? I mean, did you feel like you were making them better, sort of like improving them?
I felt that it was a really beautiful process to not just like if you had a machine translate as we would do now, right? It's not going to translate the poetic nature of the writing. It's only going to translate word for word. So
Right.
that was to me the exciting creativity of that was like, how do I convey what the poet was going for, or what I think the poet was going for, or like how you would say this in English, like they've used some metaphor that absolutely doesn't translate into English. So how do I kind of help the original writer? That's what it felt like, was
That's
help
awesome.
help them bridge the language gap into English. So I did really enjoy that class and got an A, and that made me feel like if I had taken this earlier, I would have had the courage. Oh, I remember now. No, I couldn't take any other creative writing class. They didn't let in juniors and seniors. I remember now, this was a grave injustice.
Wow.
If you didn't figure out until your junior or senior year that you wanted to do creative writing, too bad for you. Like there was only a couple classes you could take. You weren't allowed to like suddenly dig in.
So this was it. This was your creative writing because that was all that was left?
Apparently.
Oh,
And I could
that
have done
sounds,
it on my own, but in terms of like,
yeah.
kicking outs or whatever. And then I kind of like stepped away. Like I always kept reading. Like, so I lived in Manhattan soon after graduating, a couple years. And I lived at the very, very tippy top north part of Manhattan, literally the second stop on the A line, which is the line that goes all the way down
That
Manhattan.
like 100th Street or something, like way up there.
200, 200.
Oh, okay.
So Seaman Avenue. Anyway, and so I would always get a seat because it was the second stop, and I'd have a big old book. We didn't have iPads yet. And I would read like a novel every couple of days between, because my commute took me from 200th to 23rd Street. So it
Wow.
was,
Order of
that was
magnitude drop.
plenty of reading time there and back. And so fiction has always just played a big role in my life. And I remember one time like just kind of looking around, like I was getting such joy out of the book and just kind of looking around and like there's all these people here doing different things. Some are reading newspapers or whatever. No one was on their phone yet. And I just felt like, man, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky that I have this joy of reading. I feel sorry for anyone that doesn't have that in their lives. Like I just remember that feeling of like, oh, this is a special thing, like it's special that these people wrote these books that we can read, but also special that like for me, like that I can get such joy out of something that's basically free, right? I mean, like it's just you go to the library and there's just this wealth of opportunity, treasure troves of beautiful books to read. So anyway, so yeah, so I did move over to journalism in my later 20s. I was working at a independent newspaper in Winnipeg, Canada. And again, I had to sneak my way in towards writing. Like I was an editor because I knew I could edit other people's words. I knew I was a grammar fiend and could like get in there and be like, terrible, don't do this, stop. Or shorten, something that was like, we need 500 words and they give us 2,000. Like, I could get in there and do that. And then it was like, oh, deadlines here. We need a little column with a review of this book. Can you quickly do this? Like, okay, yes. So then I was like kind of forced into it, right? So then I was kind of like, I did some film criticism, some book criticism, some interviewing. And then, so then I'm like, oh, I'm a reporter. This is cool. And really, really enjoyed that. And then that kind of segued me into fiction. So I was like, okay, once I had kind of had the courage to write nonfiction, suddenly that was like something clicked in my brain, like, and you're also allowed to write fiction and you're also allowed to write poetry of your own that's not in translation. And there was a really cool website. I don't remember the name of it now, but it had poetry contests. So you would go on a Sunday and you'd get 10 words and you'd have 15 minutes to write a poem out of the 10 words. And that was so freeing to me. Yeah, it was super freeing to me to just, I think it was kind of like the translation where it was like, I'm going to give you a hint.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
you have to start from scratch. Like, here's like, figure out how these 10 words play in your head.
It's like the
And
constraints themselves are freeing, weirdly.
exactly. And the time limit, super great, right? It was
Yeah,
like, do it now. And then we would all share our poems and people would like give feedback and like always got great feedback because I basically my poems almost always were a story of some kind, right?
yeah.
Every now and then I would do like a just sensory poem or something, but a lot of the time it was like, all right, how can I make a story out of these 10 words? So
Wow.
that was cool. Again, kind of segue into fiction. And then I joined a writing group and we put out a chapbook of short stories and poems, and that felt really good. And then I kept getting this feedback from my writing group, though. They're like, you're great at dialogue, but man, you really suck at describing things. You should just write a screenplay. Like they're like, I have no idea what your character looks like. I'm like, I just know that you're like plot driven and dialogue driven. So yeah, that brought me into the world of film and screenwriting and you know, once I was screenwriting, I'm like, well, what happens to these words after I write them? And so then I learned more about filmmaking, and I ended up at the Canadian Film Center. Yes.
Question. When you were
Yes.
talking about um, words
Yeah.
and the specialness of words and the gift of being able to use words to sort of see into whatever, everything, um, I started thinking about the voice.
Mm.
Like, so you were talking about written words and reading words, but it seems to me when you went into the film world, those words that you wrote came out in someone's voice. And
Mm.
so
Yeah.
this is sort of like finding your voice. Is it? Am I making that up?
I will say it was a very special experience when you write a screenplay and then these actors show up to interview, right? Like, you know, audition, to say like, we want to speak these words. And then you hear them do it. And then you match up like, oh, I want to hear this person talking to this person. And then they come and do it and you film it and then you watch it in a theater and other people are seeing your words. Like it's an incredible feeling. Yeah.
Wow.
And it is different. It is different than writing a short story and having people read it and say, yeah, cool story or whatever. Like it is a very different thing to have these people. And my favorite part was people would like create this like crazy backstory for their character. And I was like, okay. You know, like, so they were like contributing to the creative process because I was like, they would ask me like, blah, 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 you know, something about the backstory. And I'm like, yeah,
Sure.
I don't really have any feelings about that. And so like, then sometimes they would get together and like, you know, go on a coffee date together and decide together what their two people's backstory together was. And I was like, I'm so fine with this. Like, I have no
Well, now
ownership
you're the
over
person
this.
who writes the paper, the original, and then these are the translators, sort of.
Kind of, yeah, or just like I know what happened starting at this moment in time, and if you want to tell me what happened before that, and I know there's writers and directors that don't feel that way, right? That are
Right.
very, oh no, I know I've got the whole backstory right here. Here you go. I know everything, and I do write much more that way now, I must say. Long form fiction, yeah, it requires like much more of an outline and understanding your characters and all that. But for short films, it was again kind of freeing to just have like, this is your moment in time. This is the moment I'm seeing these characters. But for the actors, they were like, I need more. And I was like, okay. All right, feel free. But yeah, so yeah, thank you for like kind of bringing that thought in that like, yes, film and TV. So I went to the Canadian Film Center to study television writing is what I ended up studying there. And again, you know, thinking beyond a short story or a short film or even a 2 hour film, suddenly if you're talking about a TV series, you know, hours and hours, dozens of hours of story happening there. And that was super fun. And it was also very collaborative. So this comes back to the notion of like, there's private writing, and then, you know, having these actors and directors involved, suddenly you're in another world of other people getting involved. And then for television writing, almost always it's a collaborative group effort. There's the writing room, and it could be someone's original idea, and they're going to tell you like, here's the basic, you know, theme and all the things that are going on here. And maybe they do know the whole backstory and they're going to share that. but then you usually, sit down and either you write the script or sit down with someone else and co-write the script. And that was super cool. I really enjoyed that as well. And
I didn't know that you'd done TV writing.
yeah, well, so I ended up on a nonfiction, what are the unscripted travel shows called Bumpers LGBTQ, and super fun, based out of Toronto. And yeah, we had episodes all over the world, and I did write, some of the like scripted parts of the show. But I didn't get to go travel with the show, so I was sad about that. So
Oh,
yeah. People would be like, I can't wait to meet you. And I'd be like, yeah, you're not going to meet me.
I do love to travel, so that's
Yeah,
annoying.
it was a painful thing. But yeah, no, I don't think I ever wrote a scripted television episode. I actually ended up, it was funny because I have a lot of organizational skills, as you know. So a lot of times what happens is people realize that and peg me for leadership roles, in this case, producing. So yes, people were like, yeah, I think you're a producer. So I did end up doing film producing for a couple of years. And during that time, kind of the role got reversed. Suddenly people were pitching me their stories and pitching me their scripts. And I'm reading through their scripts and giving feedback. And, I did some competitions as a judge and stuff. So that was a really valuable experience to think about, right? So then I think that was when I started really thinking about, like, I had thought about it a little bit as a book critic and film critic, like what makes a really good story, right? But I had, hadn't quite like really delved down into like distilling my notions of like, what do I care about? What if I'm going to spend years of my life producing something, what story do I want to tell? Yes, Julia.
I have another question, which is, I want to hear about what makes a good story, if that's what you want to talk about. And I noticed that the way you talked about being a producer slash in the leadership role was sort of like resigned. Like you weren't like, and then I got to live my dream and be a TV producer. Like so many people, that would be their dream. And you were like, yeah, so they made me a producer and then I did production.
Well, I think what it is again, like I have this love of words, right? And I want to write, so like it was kind of like, you're a good writer, but you'd be awesome at it's like, and it was almost like so I can remember in the moment it really sunk in, was like, yeah, we were doing like a as part of the film center, they brought in, experts from people who were working out in the world, and one of them was a producer, and she was trying to like walk us through like what does it take to get a film or TV show made, and in this case TV shows. And so she was kind of like presenting stuff, and most of the rest of my class was like zoning out, right?
Yeah,
And she would like, kind of throw out kind of a hypothetical-ish question, and I'd be like, I know,
I love me.
like how long will, if we can do this and this, how long will we have? And I'm like, I know the answer, or like, if we need this much money and we have this, what's left? No,
Because I could do math. I mean, it comes down to like, could someone in
exactly.
the room also do math? Yeah.
So someone introduced me to a cool phrase I hadn't heard until last week. So left brain, right brain, right? I've known long time. I have both the creative side and the logical side, the planning side, the carry it out side. And he said, you're center brained. And I thought that was very nice, because that made me feel like you're balanced. It's
Yeah,
not one or the other. It's like you have, a unified brain, basically.
I'd love that.
Yeah, that made me feel like, okay, this is a this isn't a bad thing. But I mean, it's even happened with you and me, right? So like we haven't talked yet about the other kind of form of words that I like, which is coding,
Yeah.
and taking words and giving them to a computer and saying, here's your instructions. I mean, talk about limitations. Like you have to put those words in the exact right format that the computer can understand. And
And
that's a
the exact right relationship to other words.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's getting a lot easier now. You can use natural language and get, a language model to create the code for you. But, when I started out, we had to, be very specific in that kind of language production. And so, I'm like, I want to be a coder. And you're like, you know what you're awesome at? Leading teams of coders.
Sorry, but it was so true.
Like, yeah, I can't take it as it's not an uncompliment. Like
Right.
it's, it is a compliment, and it does speak to, like, so again, when I was, you talked about what's your passion, like I do feel like my whole life, I've pursued many passions. I've done many things, and I've always kind of been jealous of people, like going to Oberlin, there were people in the conservatory. It's like, what my thing is? Oboe.
Yeah.
Oboe forever. And I always had that kind of like jealousy of like, wow, they are working on this 5-10 hours a day. They know this is their thing. And like, because I've had these multiple kind of, draws in my life, and skill sets that I've developed, or, have gifts for, I do feel sometimes like, oh, but I'm getting pulled away from the thing I quote really want to do. And it's like, it's not totally true, because I love leading teams. That's what I do now. Speaking of leading tech teams, that is where I have ended up right now for my quote day job. And I was thinking about it, like when I was like, okay, well, if words is my thing, how does that tie in to leading teams? And I mean, it's compassion, right? It's, speaking of passion, it's compassion. Like, how do I figure out what this person's feeling? What's their backstory, right? If you want to think about it that way, how do I understand their motivations? Like it is actually kind of all together. But also, how do I use words in the most effective way to reach them, to
Yep.
motivate them, to ask them the right questions, to see what's going on for them, to explain something? Like you do need those skills. And there's some
Yeah.
people who come from the strictly coding side who aren't as great at that, because like they know how to code real great, and that's awesome, and that can be useful. But if they can't also bring the language and the communication side to it, I do think that is a skill that can be missing, and some tech management folks is not realizing, or even people hiring people to go into those roles, not realizing like, no, this is a role that requires a center brain, if you will.
These are
Like,
real skills. And I think what I see is, I think you kind of made an understatement. I mean, I think it's very, very, very common to hire like the best coder,
yes.
to be the manager. And then it's like, well, uh-oh, unless they're center brained, might be a problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. And language of persuasion, right? In the business world, I've done marketing and stuff like that, and fundraising even, right? Writing letters, asking people to give money to a project, whether that's like for a nonprofit or a film. Like that's a whole other form of using language at a higher level of like, okay, how do I convince somebody else to do something, basically, right? And you can do that in subtle ways, or you can do that in very blatant ways. And I think all of that is tied together. So it was actually a very interesting experience for me to try to like trace this path through all these different things I've done. And even like in code written by humans, I'm looking for clarity. Like when I started a new job in February, and one of the first things I ended up asking the team to do was like, well, let's rewrite some of this code. We call it refactoring. It is a mess, and we need to make it cleaner, shorter, easier to read. It's not a mess because someone was bad, but just like it's been worked on for a couple of years now, and like we just keep
By a bunch of different people.
tacking stuff in here. And there's got to be I can't read it, right? So like thinking about code as reading, I think, and telling a story, right? Well, what are we asking the computer to do here? And how does this, if you've got a bunch of files interrelated, how do what's that path? How do you read the story of the code? And oh, that sounds like a book I should read.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Speaking of books and writing.
Okay, so that's actually the final question. If you have gotten through sort of what you wanted to get through, I think we're ready for the final question, but have you?
I do have one more piece to the puzzle, as it were. Is like I love learning languages, as I mentioned. And I did actually do 1 year of graduate study in linguistics, because I was like, I love words, like, so I knew this. It wasn't like the words hadn't occurred to me before as something I love. But when I was in grad school, I just felt like they kind of took the fun out of it. Like language is for me like alive, and I wanted to do. I can say this. I think I was ahead of my time. Instant messaging, AOL, IM,
Oh yeah, I remember you talking about that.
RC chat or whatever. And I wanted to like study that and be like, look, here we're talking about like a sentence is a noun and a verb and a receiver and blah blah. And I'm like, no. People say, you know, one word and then some ellipses and the other person gets it. Like
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we can communicate without using full sentences. And how are people doing that? And like we're just starting to get into computer modeling and stuff like that. And like yeah, I think I was just a little too soon for that. And I love, reading about all the large language modeling and all the stuff that's happening with that. Like that is super interesting to me, but I still also just love learning languages. Like I'm still studying languages and hope to do so forever.
Okay, so I have an opinion about I was too soon. I was too soon thing. Because I think people who are ahead of their time often say that, like, oh, I was too soon. No, you were the ones who were creating the trend quietly through saying what's on your mind, through thinking interesting thoughts and not thinking that they're stupid. Like,
Sure, I absolutely could have. Certainly there was somebody in my department who was like into like how can we use computers and start analyzing this stuff, and how can we take a bunch of words and feed it into a computer, and that was super interesting. And again, blending the two parts of me that were interested in coding and words. And yeah, but being told I wasn't academic enough was like, okay, then bye.
yeah,
Like,
seriously, whatever academics is,
yeah.
forget
And
it.
I don't have a lot of regrets there, but it's just I feel like I've tried to hold on to all those things. Like I am still like coming up with ideas for novels and like, oh, what would that look like? And trying to think about like, okay, is this the right time to wake up every morning and work on something like that? But I'm ready for your last question.
Okay. But so first of all, thanks for sharing all this. Much of it I knew sort of conceptually, but I didn't have the inside scoop. Because what do friends, especially friends who work together, what do we talk about? Whatever's going on now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or whatever we fear about the future, but not so much the past. So I thought that was really, thank you. I loved hearing about it.
Thank you.
I think other people will too, and find that your story is inspiring because you listened to both the reality of what was needed and what was in your heart, So
I like more center.
more center.
Or no,
So
I guess that would be here.
yeah, the whole center of the whole body. So I thought that was really cool, and I want to thank you. So the question I have that it occurs to me, I'd like to ask every person, but maybe I won't stick to this. But I want to ask you is what advice do you have for each of the generations who aren't Generation X? So like Generation X, that's us. We've been watching all the other generations because that's what we know how to do.
Yeah.
And so like Gen Z, millennials, and boomers who are getting towards the end of their lives, what advice do you have for each of those from what you've observed about each of those groups of people? I know, it just came into my head, sorry.
That's okay. I'm trying to think about it in the context of what we've been talking about. I mean, for the younger generations, I would say like step away from the screens sometimes, right? Like I feel like they've been given this legacy of like, hey, let me entertain you and give you a screen, right? Like they've just literally grown up with a screen in their hands. And thinking back to that story of being on the subway and people doing something besides looking at their phones. I think even though I've been talking about words here and reading something on a page, you did hit on something like I love connecting with other human beings. I love having a conversation and playing with words that way. And I'm not saying they don't. I mean, there's tons of great conversations I've had, as recently as last week with a bunch of people who are just finishing college, and they are, completely ready to have a face-to-face interaction despite all the challenges they've been given, including like being on a screen for learning for COVID times, so I think that's my main one. For the older generation, my tip is get hearing aids. So I have some. I'm a early adopter. Speaking of early adoption, I'm an early adopter on hearing aids, and that is also for Gen X. That it makes such a huge difference to actually be able to hear every word someone says, instead of 50%.
Awesome.
It's a real game changer. And I think, one of the things I hinted at on the other things I might have talked about today was, it is never too late, right? If they want to try their hands at writing a novel or a screenplay or poetry or whatever, I think there's no need to sit around and regret that they haven't done that before. Now they can go for it now.
Yeah, that is also one
All
of your
that life experience, right? Like when I read screenplays, no offense, like, but when I used to do juries and stuff, almost, all the ones that were coming out of the 20 somethings were like zombies. And like you could really feel that shift, like after people started like getting married and having babies or whatever, then or even not doing that, but like just having a little more life experience, then their stories got a little more interesting because they were talking more about human connection and time passing and life passing. Apparently zombies can be a metaphor for all of that, but I've never quite grasped it. But yeah, so I think someone that's in their older years has the most to share with words and stories.
Yeah, Polly, you're always actually in our friendship very encouraging of do the thing that you never did that you want to do. Like you're always making bucket lists and you're doing them. And that's just a special gift that I think you offer the world, which is this inspiration. So thank you.
Thank you.
I love you.
Love you too. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for the thought-provoking questions.
Yeah, thanks for being on the queries because you're a Quaker, right? You
Well,
do.
even the like pre question to get me going down this road of thinking about, what is important to me. So
Awesome.
thank you. The through
Awesome.
line, my own life.
Thanks for being my first guest. Let's see what happens.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.